For my physics project, I thought it would be a lot more interesting to conduct my own experiment rather than to just find data off the internet, so that's what I did. I conducted two experiments. One, I dropped a brick on a stick and the stick broke, and two, I dropped a brick on a board and it simply rebounded off. These demonstrated two different types of collisions, and I thought it was very interesting to do. Here's my first experiment. I dropped a brick 2.56 meters onto a stick in 0.67 seconds. From the stick to the ground was a distance of 0.41 meters, and it took 0.18 seconds. Here's another angle. This collision is obviously an inelastic collision because the shape of the stick was changed. It broke in half. Here's the data that I collected from this experiment. Before the collision, the brick was traveling at 6.6 meters per second, and the stick wasn't moving, so it was traveling at 0 meters per second. After they collided, the brick was traveling at 4.554 meters per second, and the stick was also traveling at the same speed. As I expected, the collision slowed down the speed of the brick but increased the speed of the stick. The brick started off with a momentum of 13.464 kilogram meters per second, and the stick started off with a momentum of 0 because it wasn't moving. The final momentum of both of these objects after the collision was 9.29 kilogram meters per second. The change in momentum for the brick was negative 4.174 kilogram meters per second, and the change in momentum for the stick was 9.29 kilogram meters per second. Added together, these get 5.116 kilogram meters per second. According to the law of conservation of momentum, this number is supposed to be 0, but considering that I gathered this data myself, it's pretty close. An impulse of negative 4.17 newtons per second was applied to the brick, and an impulse of 1.047 newtons per second was applied to the stick. The force applied to the brick in the collision was negative 4.9 newtons, and the force applied to the stick during the collision was 1.23 newtons. Potential and kinetic energy, as well as other types, are evident in this collision. There is potential and kinetic energy whenever the brick is in the air, and a small part of it is transferred into sound and heat energy when the brick hits the stick. Here's my second experiment. For my second experiment, I dropped a brick 2.31 meters onto a board. It took 0.7 seconds. The brick rebounded off the board to a height of about 0.41 meters and took about 0.31 seconds. This demonstrates an elastic collision because the objects bounced off of each other. Neither one's shape was changed permanently. Here's the data that I collected from this experiment. Before the collision, the brick was traveling through the air at 7.64 meters per second and the board wasn't moving. After the collision, the brick rebounded off the board at negative 0.264 meters per second, but the board stayed stationary at 0 meters per second. Although in my experiment the board ended up falling, it was only because the brick later fell on it. Before the collision, the brick had a momentum of 15.59 kilogram meters per second, and the board had a momentum of 0 kilogram meters per second. After the brick hit the board and rebounded, it had a momentum of negative 5.39 kilogram meters per second, and the board stayed at 0. The total change in momentum was negative 20.98 kilogram meters per second, which is nowhere close to the 0 that it is supposed to be according to the law of conservation of momentum. I believe this discrepancy is caused by multiple factors, but primarily because the brick actually did cause the board to move a little bit. It had some momentum. The impulse applied to the brick was negative 20.97 newtons per second, and the force applied to the brick was very similar, negative 20.76 newtons. The impulse applied to the board was 0 newtons per second, and the force was 0 newtons. This, I know, cannot be entirely correct because I know the board did in fact apply a force to the brick. In this collision, the same types of energies are evident. There is potential and kinetic energy, obviously, but also sound and heat energy created when the brick hits the board. These two experiments demonstrated an elastic and an inelastic collision and yielded some very interesting results. That's my physics project.